Hey guys, Kelade here. So I want to do a follow-up to my previous video because there were some additional questions that you guys had, and then on top of that, I want to clear a pretty big misunderstanding, I think, in the dungeon journal or the power journal in general on legendaries. So right now, when you go into the adventure guide, there are 4 different selections, right? Suggested content, dungeons, raids. They've added this new powers one, which you can kind of see like your legendary powers. And when you hover over them, right, if you don't have the legendary, it'll show you where to get them. The thing is, before today, so I'm pretty sure they just changed this because as of last night, this was not correct. So there was an issue where they actually inputted the incorrect source. So right here, you see that this Reckless Defense legendary, it drops from Torghast, Tower of the Damned, layer 3. This was actually incorrectly confused with the Deathmaker one, and they flipped it. So like this source was actually incorrectly labeled for Deathmaker, and the Reckless Defense, it said it dropped from Necrotic Wake, which is not true, right? Because in that dungeon, Memory of the Deathmaker is the one that actually drops. So just to clear it up, confirm, I could even show you this video right now playing of me in Necrotic Wake getting the Deathmaker legendary. So definitely you get the Deathmaker legendary from Necrotic Wake, and which is good because that means what? That means you can farm it. And right now, this definitely does look like it's the strongest legendary for Fury Warriors. So for, you know, the rest of this week, which is 1 day left, or all of next week, if you're like, hey, I don't have much stuff to do, well, you can go and you can farm this legendary. So the way that you farm the legendary is you just do the dungeon version. So you can only do mythic dungeon once per week. So you can get your mythic done. And then you can do heroics once per day. So that means what you would do is you can go to the dungeon finder, you can go specific queue, and you can specifically queue for Necrotic Wake, right? Now for heroic, since it resets once per day, once you specifically queue for it once, the only way that you can get it again on heroic is if you do a random heroic. But since there's 8 dungeons, not a good chance that you'll get it. As far as for actually spamming it, what you do is you go to Necrotic Wake for normal. Now for normal, you can queue for it over and over and over again, which is what I did yesterday actually. I queued for this dungeon 15 times until I got it on normal difficulty, not including the other 2 difficulties. And that's how you do it. You kill the first 2 bosses, you don't get the legendary, you just leave, and there's no penalties. I think it was maybe last expansion or even the one before where Blizzard removed the penalty. As long as you kill a boss afterwards, in which case now you're killing 2 bosses, right? Because you need to kill a Marth. The second boss of Necrotic Wake is the one that drops this legendary. So you want to kill that boss and then you leave and you queue up again. And you don't really have to worry about the group that you're leaving because they're just going to get another DPS. And if that DPS is leveling, even better for them because 2 of the 4 bosses are already dead. And another thing I wanted to show you guys while I'm standing here in front of Torghast is that just to make sure you do it all, right? Now you're supposed to have 810 ashes. Is it possible to have more than 810 right now? I think it is if you somehow got lucky with their mission table. Some people are saying and they were able to get like soul ashes from that, but I don't think it's a crazy amount. So 810 is realistically the number everybody should be at. And if you want to just hover over it, there's 2 open wings this week, and the soul forges and upper reaches, both of them can only go up to layer 3. So when you hover over your map, right, you see that it's correct. And then on top of that, for people that are curious, is that it seems that you only have to 1 do the initial level for a new wing once it opens, but after that you can skip to whatever layer you've done on any of the wings, it seems like, right? So realistically, you should only have to do like 5 layers. So I understand that there's 6 layers, but if you go through 1 Torghast tower and you go 1, 2, and 3, on the second tower, you only have to do layer 1 and layer 3 at the moment. You can just skip 2 and do 3. And you don't have to worry about it. Once you do the hardest difficulty, you'll get the rewards for both of the other ones. So next week, for example, when the reset happens, let's pretend nothing changes and you have the same amount of wings and layers. If you just do layer 3 in both of the wings, you'll be done. Right. All right, let's move on to a couple of like quick questions. All right, first question. Hey, nice guide, but I want to craft for Deathmaker, legs, or cloak. Generally, if you are going to craft legendary, my recommendation is still don't craft a legendary until Mythic Week comes out or the raid comes out. Now, if you don't raid, obviously you can craft your legendaries next week if you want. If you are going to craft, the general rule of thumb is for legendary, since it's going to be a higher level than the rest of the gear, you're just going to craft the one that gives more stats, right? And especially if it's going to give stats on a slot, on a piece that generally has worse gear. So for example, if I go to, let's say, the raid and look at the loot, for example, there's actually 2 pants that can drop in the raid, and neither of them have haste on it. And for right now, haste is pretty strong of a stat. I think cloak, is there one with haste? There is one haste verse, at least, cloak that you can use. But the other thing is that your pants also just give you way more stats, right? So like if you compare it and you like look at the strength number right there and you add up the secondary stats and you compare it to a cloak, and the stats that the cloak has, the pants give you significantly more stats. So in this case, especially because you can pick what stats goes into your legendary, you most likely want to craft the leg version of that legendary. All right, next question. Is Condemn good for PvP Fury Man? It's okay, I guess. Realistically, Spirit Bastion is pretty good because it does pretty good burst. On top of that, it also chains them together so they can't actually leave, kind of like a Druid's Vortex. So realistically, if PvPs are actually focused, then I would probably go with Kyrian just for the spear. But if you actually prefer raiding and you want to focus more on PvE, I still prefer Condemn. Do I have a downloadable profile for ElvUi? I used to, and then it broke, and I haven't got around to fixing it, so not currently. I don't know what happened to my ElvUi, but everything reset. And the export doesn't work. Isn't sudden death playing better into Condemn than fresh meat? For single target is, but for last week and now this upcoming week, right? You're only doing dungeon content, and you're doing content where the ads are dying so quickly. You're finding so many new ads. Fresh meat is 100% the better talent for these like dungeon weeks. But for single target, yes, sudden death is stronger. Is Night Fae viable? I love the comment, and it seems pretty good overall. Realistically, as long as you're not playing like Maldraxxus, I think you're fine. Night Fae is whatever. There's definitely way less Night Fae players than the other 2 covenants. Unless you're pushing like the top 1%, you can realistically play whatever covenant you want, and Night Fae is fine of a covenant. Do I think Venthyr would be viable for PvP, say 2k to 2.5k for your arms, even though Kieran is best for PvP? Yeah. Sure, you can hit. I mean, if I can hit Glad, you can definitely hit Glad on anything. Especially in the current state of the game, it's definitely doable. I would say probably with any spec and any covenant, you can definitely hit either one of those numbers. And then some other questions that I've just gotten a lot, either on stream or whatever, is arms versus fury. My initial thoughts on the 2 specs after playing, arms for a little bit more is that it does seem like arms is pretty strong if your tank is going to be grouping multiple packs together and it lines up well with their cooldowns. So I think overall, like if things can be grouped together neatly for you as an arms warrior, it feels really good because you just Warbreaker and you just Blazestorm them all and with Avatar. But for Fury, it's much better for things like pugs, if the ads are more spread out, if things aren't being all pulled at the same time and it's kind of a messy pull. Fury can definitely deal with it better. I feel like Fury is more fluid and flexible, whereas arms is like very like set and contained and it has to be organized. The other thing is that it does feel like in the short single targets that we have now in the dungeons, right? I mean, I think the single target fight max is like a minute on Mythic. It's probably lower than that even. Like arms feels better with Venthyr right now because mobs die so fast that you're practically condemning them the whole time. Right now, you don't see that lull in DPS for arms, at least in how it feels, between that 80 to 35% where you can condemn. Whereas, right, in a raid setting, you're going to actually have that period, and, it could actually be significant, and it could be significantly worse, right? And on top of that, right now, nobody's using legendaries, so the numbers that you can play with and how you feel are a little bit weird, right? Especially because I don't think arms has great legendaries, at least not like the one that Fury has, so I think once that also comes in, the balance shifts a little bit more. Realistically, right now, I think you can really play whichever spec you prefer, which I think is good. And it's possible that if you want to push like 100% of the class of damage, you might need to swap between the specs while you're raiding in between bosses. But hopefully that kind of answers a little bit of that question. We'll definitely do more testing this week as we get more stuff in. As far as our gear guides and rotation guides, I'll keep working on it, though. Right now, I think even for when you do see like lists of trinkets and items and stuff like that, just be a little bit of like wary about it, is that like not everything is 100% in Sims, right? Even right now, when you look at stuff like the covenant abilities, for example, when you go into, let's see, this, and you kind of hover over like Ashen Juggernaut, right? It says 1.6% on here. When I go to raid boss, for example, and I hover over the same covenant, right, it says 3.9%. Now, I kind of need to look into this more and see if that's actually the case, if this is just a tooltip or error, or if some of these numbers are actually different. But just kind of heads up on that aspect. And of course, there's a lot of changes that are currently happening. Like I think even if you click on the status stuff, there's like, I don't want to open it because I think it's a really bright page, but when you can click on that at all times, the raid bots see what's changed. And I think even then, like not all trinkets are in there perfectly. So just be kind of wary, like when you look at some of the sims and you're thinking about it. And then of course, for conduits, is it possible that you go into every single like type of fight in the raid with a different conduit for now? Yes, that's why it's kind of important that when the raid comes out, you want to go into it with the max amount of conduit energy. Like for example, it's possible that if a single fight comes out, right, for your character, depending on like which ones you have there, maybe Ash of Juggernaut or Death and Sanity are better like as you're playing Fury. Or if you want more flexibility, right, you want to pick covenants that are more like spec neutral, right, then that's also where Ash and Juggernaut and Harrow and Punishment are better, right, because they work with both specs. Right? Like if you pick Death and Insanity, you're gonna have to change your specs every time if you want to play arms. And then similarly, like don't worry about like choices that people have right now, because people are doing dungeon content or questing content, right? So if I pick Harrow and Punishment for dungeons and I pick Fresh Meat for dungeons, that's literally the point of some of these abilities, right, is the ability to swap them. Now it would have been nice if conduits didn't have this recharge system, if it just worked like essences where you can just slot things in and out whenever you want. But hey, maybe in patch 9.3, you know, once the last raid is dead, we'll get the ability to change conduits for free. So we'll see. But as always, thanks for checking out the video, guys. Feel free to subscribe to see more. See ya.